The FBI director herself burst through the doors of Pinewood Sheriff's Station flanked by armed agents in tactical gear. "Release him immediately," she commanded, pointing at the handcuffed 73-year-old black man sitting calmly in the corner. "That's our nation's most valuable intelligence asset. You're treating like a criminal. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If this shocking moment of justice has your attention, hit that like button and subscribe to see how this small-town police station became ground zero for a federal intervention that exposed decades of injustice. What would you do if you witnessed an innocent man being wrongfully arrested? Stay tuned to see how one man's dignity in the face of discrimination changed an entire community. Walter Harrison rose at exactly 5:30 in the morning, just as he had done every day for the past 53 years of his life. Military precision never left a man even 13 years into retirement. The 73-year-old former Air Force Chief Master Sergeant made his bed with hospital corners tight enough to bounce a quarter off the surface, a habit that had survived decades of service and now 3 years of widowhood. His modest, single-story home in Pinewood, Georgia, was immaculate with everything in its proper place. Photographs lined the walls, in perfect alignment. Walter, in his dress blues, receiving commendations from 3 different presidents. Walter and his late wife Grace on their wedding day. Their son James graduating from law school. Subtle hints of his military past adorned the living room. A shadow box containing his numerous medals, including the Distinguished Service Medal and Bronze Star. A folded flag in a triangular case, and books on military strategy and intelligence operations, arranged by height on the bookshelf. Walter moved to the kitchen, where he prepared his coffee with the same precision he applied to everything else. 1 level tablespoon of grounds water filled to the 6th cup line timer set for 4 minutes. While the coffee brewed, he retrieved the Pinewood Gazette from his front porch. The morning air was already heavy with humidity, promising another scorching Georgia summer day. Walter settled into his recliner, unfolding the newspaper methodically. The headlines spoke of local concerns, budget issues for the school district, an upcoming town festival, and complaints about increased police patrols in certain neighborhoods. Walter knew which neighborhoods those would be without reading further. After Grace passed 3 years ago from cancer, Walter had decided to leave Washington, D.C., and settle in this small southern town where his cousin had lived. He'd wanted peace and quiet for his final years, somewhere he could reflect on his life of service. Pinewood had seemed perfect on paper, affordable quiet with a VA clinic nearby. What the town brochures hadn't mentioned was the undercurrent of racial tension that existed beneath the surface pleasantries. Walter sipped his coffee, mentally planning his day. Thursday meant grocery shopping and picking up his heart medication from Thompson's Pharmacy. He dressed carefully in pressed khaki slacks and a light blue button-down shirt. Despite the heat, Walter believed in presenting himself properly. Another military habit that had never faded. He polished his shoes before slipping them on, checked his wallet for his ID cards and the grocery list Grace had taught him to always prepare, and headed out to his meticulously maintained 10-year-old Buick. The drive into town took exactly 7 minutes. Walter parked in front of Wilson's grocery, nodding politely to Mrs. Wilson herself as he entered. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she said with the practiced smile of a small-town shop owner. Some of the locals were genuinely friendly, respecting Walter's military background and dignified demeanor. Others viewed him with thinly veiled suspicion, an outsider who didn't quite belong, especially one who carried himself with such confidence. Walter methodically made his way through his shopping list, selecting each item with care. Fresh vegetables for the stir-fry he planned to make that evening. Chicken breasts on sale. Orange juice and whole-grain bread. He exchanged pleasantries with those who offered them, and politely ignored the stares from those who didn't. After paying for his groceries, Walter drove the short distance to Thompson's Pharmacy. As he pulled into a parking space, he noticed a police cruiser parked nearby, two officers watching him through the windshield. Officers Dane Mitchell and Kyle Brenner had been with the Pinewood Sheriff's Department for just under 3 years. Mitchell, 27, stocky with close-cropped blonde hair, had a growing reputation among the black residents of Pinewood for random stops and searches. Brenner, 25, lankier and more reserved, typically followed Mitchell's lead. Both watched as Walter entered the pharmacy. Inside, Walter greeted the pharmacist, Dr. Thompson, who had his prescription ready. "Blood pressure still good, Mr. Harrison?" Thompson asked as he rang up the medication. "Steady as she goes," Walter replied with a small smile. "Military discipline helps with following doctor's orders." As Walter paid for his medication and turned to leave, he noticed the two officers had entered the pharmacy and were browsing items near the entrance, occasionally glancing in his direction. Walter recognized the look. He'd seen it countless times before, in countless places across America and around the world. The look that said he was being assessed as a threat, not as a citizen. He tucked his receipt and medication into his pocket, straightened his shoulders slightly, and walked toward the exit with the measured pace of a man who had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. He had no way of knowing that this routine Thursday was about to become anything but routine. Walter had just placed his grocery bags in the trunk of his Buick when he heard footsteps approaching from behind. "Excuse me, sir." The voice was young, authoritative, with that particular edge Walter had learned to recognize over his 73 years of life. He turned slowly, hands visible by instinct and training. Officers Mitchell and Brenner stood 6 feet away, Mitchell slightly ahead with his hand resting casually near his holster. "Yes, officers. Can I help you with something?" Walter responded, his voice steady and respectful, despite the immediate understanding of what was happening. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," Mitchell said, eyes scanning Walter's car and groceries. "Mind telling us what you're doing here today?" Walter maintained his calm exterior, though inside he felt the familiar weight of recognition. This dance was as old as America itself. "Just picking up my weekly groceries and heart medication, officers. I live over on Maple Street. Been in Pinewood about 3 years now." Officer Brenner nodded slightly, but Mitchell's expression remained fixed, skeptical. "You seem to be taking your time loading up. Just standing around watching the parking lot." Walter looked directly at Mitchell, his military-bearing automatic. "I was organizing my groceries, sir. Eggs and bread separate from heavier items." The respect in his voice was genuine, not for the man, but for the uniform and what it should represent. Walter had spent 35 years serving his country, including advising military police operations. He understood proper procedure, which made recognizing improper procedure all the more painful. "I'll need to see some identification," Mitchell said, taking a step closer. Walter reached slowly for his wallet, movements deliberate and telegraphed. His mind flashed to the briefings he'd given young airmen decades ago. When confronted, move with purpose but never with haste. Haste can be misinterpreted as aggression or flight risk. He handed over his driver's license and VA identification card. Mitchell studied them with exaggerated scrutiny, while Brenner maintained his position, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "You know you match the description of someone we're looking for in connection with a convenience store robbery last night." Mitchell said, his tone suggesting he'd just found this connection rather than manufactured it on the spot. Walter felt a familiar tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with his heart condition. "May I ask what that description was, officer?" His voice remained level, despite recognizing the well-worn script playing out. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Male, black, older, driving an older model sedan." Walter nodded slowly. "That's a rather broad description, officer. Could fit quite a number of people in this town." "You questioning police work now?" Mitchell's tone hardened. In that moment, Walter had a flash of memory. Saigon, 1972. Frankfurt, 1983. Washington, D.C., 1995. Different decades, different contexts, same underlying current of suspicion based on nothing but the color of his skin. He'd served through Vietnam, the Cold War Desert Storm, all while facing the additional battle of proving his worth in a system that often viewed him with suspicion. First respect, second. "No, sir. Just trying to understand the situation," Walter replied. Mitchell handed the ID cards to Brenner, then stepped toward Walter's car. "Mind if we take a look inside your vehicle?" It wasn't really a question. Before Walter could properly respond, Mitchell was already opening the passenger door. "Sir, I don't consent to a search of my vehicle," Walter stated clearly, knowing his rights, despite suspecting they were about to be ignored. "Got something to hide?" Mitchell shot back, already rifling through the glove compartment. Walter noticed bystanders beginning to take notice. A young woman across the parking lot had her phone out recording the encounter. Mitchell emerged from the car holding Walter's prescription bag. "What's this?" he demanded, though the pharmacy label was clearly visible. "My prescription heart medication. You can see the pharmacy label right there," Walter explained patiently. Mitchell opened the bag, examining the pill bottle inside. "These look like illegal pills to me." Brenner finally spoke up, his voice quieter. "They're clearly labeled prescription medication, Dane." Mitchell shot his partner a warning look. "People disguise illegal drugs all the time. We should take these in for testing." Walter felt the indignity burning in his throat, but kept his voice measured. "Those are my heart medications prescribed by Dr. Waters at the VA clinic. I just picked them up from Thompson's Pharmacy not 10 minutes ago. You can call the pharmacist to verify." Several more bystanders had gathered, now watching the confrontation unfold. Walter could hear whispers, see more phones recording. Mitchell seemed to notice the audience too, which only made him double down. "Sir, please place your hands behind your back." Walter's mind raced through options, evaluating them with the strategic thinking that had made him valuable to 3 presidential administrations. Resist, comply. Every path seemed to lead to the same destination. "On what charges, officer?" he asked, knowing the answer would be insufficient. "Interfering with a police investigation, possible possession of controlled substances." Mitchell's hand was on his handcuffs now. Walter looked at Brenner, seeing the discomfort and uncertainty in the younger officer's eyes. "Officer Brenner, you know this isn't right," Walter said quietly. Brenner looked away. With practiced dignity, Walter slowly placed his hands behind his back. As the cold metal closed around his wrists, the indignity of the moment washed over him. 73 years old. 35 years of military service. Top secret clearance. Advisor to generals and presidents. And still in this parking lot in Georgia, none of that mattered against the color of his skin. "You're making a very serious mistake," Walter said quietly, as Mitchell began leading him toward the police cruiser. Not a threat, but a simple statement of fact that would prove prophetic within the hour. Comment number 1. If you've ever witnessed or experienced racial profiling. Has our society made progress, or are we still fighting the same battles decades later? Like and subscribe if you believe every American deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their skin color. The question remains, what happens when a decorated military veteran with high-level government connections gets treated like a common criminal? How quickly will the tables turn when the full weight of federal authority responds to this small-town injustice? The back seat of the police cruiser smelled of disinfectant and lingering sweat. Walter sat upright, military posture intact despite the handcuffs biting into his arthritic wrists. Each bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through his joints, but his face remained impassive. He'd endured far worse physical discomfort during his career. The emotional weight, however, was another matter entirely. After 35 years of distinguished service to his country, after briefing presidents and generals, after helping develop intelligence protocols that had saved countless American lives, here he was, handcuffed in the back of a police car in a small Georgia town, arrested for being black in the wrong place at the wrong time. Walter glanced at his watch. 1400 hours. He was scheduled for his weekly check-in call with former colleagues at 1600. These calls weren't just social. They were protocol for retired intelligence officers with his level of clearance and knowledge. Missing the call would trigger questions. In the front seat, Officers Mitchell and Brenner were discussing their catch, as if Walter couldn't hear them, or perhaps not caring if he did. "Told you something was off about him," Mitchell was saying, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Always walking around town like he owns the place." Brenner seemed less enthusiastic. His ID checked out, though, military veteran and everything. So, plenty of criminals are veterans, and those pills definitely looked suspicious. Walter noticed Brenner glancing at him in the rearview mirror, uncertainty in his eyes. "You doing okay back there, sir?" Brenner asked, earning a sharp look from Mitchell. Walter met his eyes in the mirror. "I've been better, officer." His mind drifted to other vehicles he'd ridden in military transports crossing the jungle in Vietnam, armored cars in the Middle East, diplomatic vehicles in Eastern Europe during the height of the Cold War. His work in signals intelligence and counterterrorism had taken him across the globe, often in dangerous circumstances. None of those situations had made him feel as vulnerable as he felt now. The cruiser pulled into the small Pinewood Sheriff's Station, a one-story brick building with the county seal displayed prominently on the front. Mitchell opened the rear door. "Let's go," he said roughly, helping Walter out of the car. The station was busier than Walter had expected for a Thursday afternoon. Several deputies looked up as Mitchell led him through to the processing area. A desk sergeant, an older white man with graying hair and a substantial belly stretching his uniform, looked up from his computer. "What have we got, Mitchell?" "Suspicious individual, possible narcotics," Mitchell replied, pushing Walter's wallet and prescription bottle onto the desk. The sergeant, whose nameplate read Collins, picked up Walter's military ID and studied it, then looked at Walter with slightly widened eyes. "Chief Master Sergeant." Walter nodded, once dignified despite the circumstances. Collins looked back at the ID, then at Mitchell with a questioning expression that the younger officer either missed or ignored. "Need to get him processed," Mitchell insisted. Walter was led to a fingerprinting station where his hands were uncuffed just long enough to press each finger onto an electronic scanner. The system was connected to national databases, standard procedure for all arrests. What wasn't standard was what would happen when those prints entered the system. Walter knew his fingerprints would trigger alerts in certain classified databases, but he wasn't sure how quickly the response would come or what form it would take. He was photographed, his personal items inventoried, and placed in a plastic bin. "One phone call," Collins said, gesturing to a phone on the wall. Walter dialed his son's number from memory. James Harrison was a successful attorney in Atlanta specializing in civil rights law. The call connected on the third ring. "Dad, what's going on? You never call this time of day." Walter kept his voice steady. "James, I've been arrested in Pinewood. I'm at the sheriff's station." A beat of silence. "What? On what charges?" "They're claiming suspicious behavior and questioning my prescription medication. It's clearly racial profiling." Walter could hear his son's sharp intake of breath followed by the sounds of movement papers rustling. "I'm on my way. Should be there in about an hour and a half. Don't say anything else to them, okay? And Dad, should I call any of your old friends?" James knew enough about his father's former career to understand the implications. "That won't be necessary," Walter replied, knowing the system would already be in motion. "But thank you, son." After the call, Walter was led to a holding cell containing two other men, a young white man who appeared to be coming down from some substance, and a middle-aged Latino man in work clothes. Both eyed Walter warily as he entered. The cell was small, with a single bench along the back wall and a stainless steel toilet in the corner. Walter sat on the bench back straight, hands folded in his lap. The Latino man nodded respectfully. "What they get you for old-timer?" Walter met his eyes. "Existing while black, apparently. You—" The man snorted. "Broken taillight, but really working construction while Hispanic." He extended his hand. "Miguel Sanchez." Walter shook it. "Walter Harrison." The young white man was watching them now, curiosity overcoming his initial wariness. "You really don't look like you belong in here, man." Walter smiled slightly. "I don't, and neither do you gentlemen, I suspect." As Walter spoke with his cellmates, sharing stories of the everyday indignities faced by men of color in America, he was unaware that his fingerprints had already triggered a series of urgent alerts in a database few people knew existed. Comment number 1. If you think our justice system treats everyone equally, regardless of race, or comment number 2, if you believe racial bias still influences law enforcement today. Have you ever stood up against injustice when you witnessed it or remained silent like Officer Brenner? Hit the like button if you believe in accountability for those who abuse their power, and subscribe to see what happens when a small-town arrest triggers a federal response. How quickly will the consequences of this wrongful arrest unfold? What will happen when Walter's true identity and importance come to light? In a windowless room deep within a nondescript government building in Langley, Virginia, screens illuminated the focused faces of intelligence analysts working the night shift. The Continuous Monitoring Initiative was a relatively new program designed to protect former intelligence assets with sensitive knowledge. Most of the alerts were routine, former analysts traveling internationally financial anomalies that usually turned out to be nothing occasional health emergencies. At precisely 2:47 in the afternoon, analyst Sarah Chen's screen flashed red a Priority 1 alert, accompanied by a soft but insistent beeping. System match fingerprint database subject, Harrison Walter J., classification Umbra. Chen sat up straight immediately, typing a series of commands to verify the match. The fingerprints had been entered into a sheriff's department system in Pinewood, Georgia, just minutes earlier. Chen turned to her supervisor, Commander David Reynolds. "Sir, we have an Umbra alert on Harrison. Fingerprints just entered into a local law enforcement database in Georgia. He appears to be under arrest." Reynolds moved quickly to her station, scanning the alert details. "Harrison. The Harrison who developed the Sentinel protocols?" "Yes, sir. The same." Reynolds immediately picked up a secure phone line. "This is Commander Reynolds' authorization code, Tango Whiskey 973. I need to speak with Director Morris immediately." Priority 1, Umbra Alert. Within 30 seconds, FBI Director Elaine Morris was on the line. Morris had been with the Bureau for 27 years, working her way up from field agent to the highest position. She was known for her razor-sharp intelligence and unwavering integrity. She was also one of the few people who knew exactly who Walter Harrison was and what he had done for national security. "Reynolds, this better be important. I'm headed into a meeting with the AG. Director Walter Harrison has been arrested by local law enforcement in Pinewood, Georgia. Fingerprints entered their system approximately 4 minutes ago." A beat of silence. "What are the charges?" "Unknown at this time. We're accessing their systems now." "Get me everything. And I mean everything. I want to know why one of our most valuable intelligence assets is sitting in a county jail. I want security footage, arrest reports, officer names. And Reynolds, get me a team ready. I'm going personally." "Yes, Director." As Reynolds began coordinating the response, Chen had already accessed the Pinewood Sheriff's Department's computer system. The security was minimal compared to what she worked with daily. Within minutes, she had the arrest report and was accessing security camera footage. Sir preliminary report shows he was arrested by officers Dane Mitchell and Kyle Brenner on suspicion of, this can't be right, suspicious behavior and possession of what they claim might be illegal narcotics. The narcotics appear to be his prescription heart medication. Reynolds cursed under his breath. Get me the footage. Chen pulled up the security camera feed from inside the station showing Walter being processed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell. Despite the circumstances, the 73-year-old former Chief Master Sergeant maintained perfect military posture, his face a mask of dignified calm. Now find me footage of the arrest if possible. Chen typed rapidly, accessing traffic cameras and business security feeds near the location listed in the report. There's a pharmacy camera that might have caught it, and it looks like multiple bystanders were recording on phones. Social media is already picking up videos of the incident. The pharmacy footage showed Walter being approached in the parking lot, the search of his car, and finally being handcuffed and placed in the police cruiser. Throughout the encounter, Walter's behavior was impeccably respectful and compliant. The officer's behavior, particularly Mitchell's, was clearly aggressive and unwarranted. Get all of this to Director Morris immediately. Reynolds ordered, his jaw tight with anger. And pull everything we have on these officers and the Pinewood Sheriff's Department. While the intelligence team worked, Director Morris was already in motion. Few people in Washington knew that early in her career, Morris had worked directly under Walter Harrison. It was Harrison who had identified her potential, mentored her, and ultimately saved her career after a mission in Eastern Europe went sideways. Everything she had accomplished since then, she owed in part to Walter Harrison's guidance and protection. Now it was her turn to protect him. I need a helicopter ready in 10 minutes. She barked into her phone as she strode through the FBI headquarters. And get me a tactical team. No, make that 2 teams. And call the Attorney General back. Tell him I'll have to reschedule. This is a national security matter. Within 15 minutes, Morris was boarding an FBI helicopter, accompanied by 8 tactical agents and 2 senior officials from the Justice Department. As the helicopter lifted off, she reviewed the information coming in on her secure tablet. The Pinewood Sheriff's Department had a history of racial discrimination complaints that had never been properly addressed. Officer Mitchell, in particular, had 6 complaints filed against him in just under 3 years, all from Black or Hispanic residents, all dismissed without investigation. Estimated time to Pinewood, she asked the pilot. 27 minutes, Director. Morris nodded, continuing to review the files. Walter Harrison's service record was legendary within certain circles of the intelligence community. 35 years in Air Force intelligence, rising to Chief Master Sergeant, the highest enlisted rank. But his title hardly captured his importance. Harrison had developed counterterrorism protocols still in use today. He had personally advised 3 presidents on sensitive intelligence matters. His knowledge of classified operations, spanning 4 decades, made him one of the most valuable intelligence assets in the country, and potentially one of the most valuable targets for foreign operatives. Back in the holding cell in Pinewood, Walter sat calmly, unaware of the storm that was about to descend on the small sheriff's station. He engaged his cellmates in quiet conversation, learning about Miguel's children and the young man's struggles with addiction. Walter had always had a gift for getting people to open up, a skill that had served him well during his intelligence career. Meanwhile, Officer Brenner stood at the front desk, a troubled expression on his face as he watched Sergeant Collins typing at his computer. Something wrong with the system? Brenner asked. Collins frowned. It's weird. Harrison's information has been flagged with some kind of federal hold, but the details are encrypted. I can't access them. Brenner shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should talk to Mitchell about this. Something doesn't feel right. Collins nodded slowly. Yeah, go get him. And Brenner, between you and me, I've never seen this kind of flag before. Whatever's happening, it's way above our pay grade. Sheriff John Daniels arrived at the station just after 3:15, his heavy boots announcing his presence before he rounded the corner into the main area. At 58, Daniels had been sheriff of Pinewood County for 17 years, running unopposed for the last 3 elections. He was a large man with a florid face and thinning gray hair, respected by most and feared by some. Someone want to tell me why I'm getting calls about one of my deputies arresting an old man at Thompson's pharmacy? He demanded, looking around the room. Sergeant Collins gestured toward the back. Mitchell brought in a 73-year-old black male, sir. Claims suspicious behavior and possible narcotics, but it looks like prescription medication to me. Daniels frowned. And this is causing enough commotion for the mayor to call me directly because... Mitchell appeared from the break room, coffee in hand. Sheriff, I was just doing my job. This guy matched the description of a suspect in that convenience store robbery. Daniels fixed Mitchell with a hard stare. What convenience store robbery would that be? Deputy, last robbery we had was 3 weeks ago, and the perp was a 20-something white kid hooked on oxy. Mitchell's confidence faltered slightly. Well, there were reports of suspicious activity in the area, and this guy was just hanging around the pharmacy parking lot watching people. Brenner, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. Daniels gestured for the arrest report, which Collins handed over. As he read, his expression darkened. You arrested a 73-year-old Air Force veteran with a spotless record because he was watching people while loading groceries into his car. He flipped to the next page, then stopped staring at the copy of Walter's military ID. Chief, Master Sergeant, 35 years of service. He looked up at Mitchell. Are you out of your damn mind? Mitchell's face reddened. With respect, sir, military service doesn't mean he can't be involved in criminal activity, and the pills he had don't look like any heart medication I've ever seen. Daniels pointed a thick finger at Mitchell. You stay right here. Brenner, come with me. The sheriff and Officer Brenner walked to the security monitor displaying the holding cells. Walter sat on the bench back straight, engaged in what appeared to be a friendly conversation with the other detainees. Tell me exactly what happened, Daniels said quietly. Brenner hesitated, glancing back toward where Mitchell waited. Mitchell said he spotted suspicious behavior. The subject was just loading groceries as far as I could tell. When we approached, he was completely respectful, showed ID without protest. Mitchell insisted on searching his car without consent or probable cause, found prescription medication, and claimed it looked suspicious. And you went along with this? Brenner looked at his shoes. I should have spoken up more clearly, sir. Daniels nodded slowly. Yes, you should have. He turned to Collins. What's the status on processing him? Collins looked uncomfortable. That's another thing, sir. When his prints went into the system, some kind of federal flag came up. I can't access the details. It's encrypted. Daniels frowned. Federal flag. What the hell did Mitchell just step in? The station phone rang, and Collins answered it. After a brief conversation, he held out the receiver to Daniels. It's James Harrison, sir, the detainee's son. Says he's an attorney in Atlanta, and he has a colonel from the Pentagon on another line who wants to speak with you. Daniels' face went pale as he took the phone. This is Sheriff Daniels. He listened for several minutes, his expression growing increasingly grave. Yes, sir. I understand. Yes, sir. We'll cooperate fully. When he hung up, he turned to Collins. Pull all of Mitchell's arrest records for the past year. Every single one. And get me the complaint files, too. Collins hesitated. Sir, most of those complaints were dismissed without... I know what happened to them. Get them anyway. While Collins worked, Daniels reviewed the security footage from the pharmacy, his face darkening further with each minute. Mitchell's body camera footage was even more damning, clearly showing racial bias in both his language and actions. When Mitchell referred to Walter as boy at one point during the search, Daniels slammed his hand on the desk. He called Mitchell into his office, closing the door behind them. Through the glass, the other officers could see Daniels shouting, his face red with anger. Mitchell initially appeared defiant, then increasingly defensive as the conversation continued. Meanwhile, Brenner had pulled Collins aside. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "This isn't the first time Mitchell has done this. He specifically targets black residents, especially ones who look like they don't belong here, as he puts it. He's planted evidence before. Nothing major, just small amounts of marijuana or pills, but enough to justify arrests." Collins stared at him. "And you're just saying this now?" Brenner looked ashamed. "I know. I should have reported it before. He's my partner, and Collins shook his head in disgust. "You better tell the sheriff everything, and I mean everything." Outside the station, a small crowd had begun to gather. Word of Walter's arrest had spread quickly through Pinewood's black community. Local pastor Reverend Isaiah Johnson was speaking with reporters from the Pinewood Gazette, while several young people held hastily made signs reading, "Justice for our veterans," and "Black Lives Matter in Pinewood." Inside Daniel's office, the confrontation with Mitchell had reached a breaking point. "You falsified a report, conducted an illegal search, and arrested a decorated veteran without cause," Daniel shouted. "And now I've got the goddamn Pentagon calling my station." Mitchell's facade finally cracked. "He was just another uppity Daniel slammed his hand on the desk again. "That's it. Turn in your badge and gun. You're suspended pending investigation." Mitchell's face contorted with rage. "For what?" "Doing my job. Keeping this town safe from people who don't belong here. People like Chief Master Sergeant Walter Harrison, a man who served this country for 35 years while you were still in diapers." Mitchell threw his badge on the desk. "This town's going to hell anyway. All these outsiders moving in thinking they're better than us." As Mitchell stormed out of the office, Brenner approached the sheriff. "Sir, there's something else you should know about Mitchell's previous arrests." Before he could continue, Collins called out from the front desk, "Sheriff, you need to see this." Daniels hurried over to find Collins staring at his computer screen, which displayed an incoming message marked Urgent, Federal Priority. "FBI helicopters just requested emergency landing clearance at the municipal airfield. ETA 5 minutes. They're coming here, sir." Daniels ran a hand over his face. "Jesus Christ! What the hell has Mitchell done?" As if in answer, the station's fax machine began printing page after page of federal documentation. Collins grabbed the first sheet, his eyes widening as he read. "Sir, this is a Department of Justice Civil Rights investigation authorization. They're taking over the station." Through the windows, they could see news vans pulling up outside, joining the growing crowd of concerned citizens. In the distance, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors cut through the humid Georgia afternoon, growing louder by the second. Sheriff Daniels straightened his uniform and squared his shoulders. "Collins, bring Harrison to my office now. Brenner, gather all documentation related to this arrest and Mitchell's previous activities. If the feds are coming in force like this, there's a hell of a lot more to Harrison than just his military record." As Collins hurried to the holding cells, Brenner looked out the window at the gathering crowd, then back to the papers continuing to spill from the fax machine. "Sir," he said quietly, "I think this is just the beginning." Walter Harrison sat across from Sheriff Daniels, still handcuffed, despite the sheriff's suddenly respectful demeanor. The office was small, but neat, with fishing trophies and family photos competing for space on the crowded shelves. A large county map dominated one wall with colorful pins marking incidents that now seemed trivial compared to what was unfolding. Mr. Harrison. Daniels began, his voice carefully modulated. I want to personally apologize for the treatment you've received today. There appears to have been a significant error in judgment by Officer Mitchell. Walter regarded the sheriff calmly. Is that what you call racial profiling now? Sheriff, an error in judgment? Daniels had the decency to look uncomfortable. Sir, I assure you that the actions of one officer don't reflect the values of this department. Don't they? Walter's voice remained even, but his eyes were penetrating. Officer Mitchell has 6 previous complaints of racial discrimination, all dismissed without investigation. That suggests a pattern, not an isolated incident. Daniels blinked in surprise. How did you know about those complaints? A small smile touched Walter's lips. Sheriff, I spent 35 years in intelligence work. Analyzing patterns and gathering information was my specialty. For the first time, Daniels seemed to truly comprehend who he was dealing with. Your military ID indicates you were a Chief Master Sergeant in Air Force Intelligence. Walter nodded once. That's correct. But there's more to it than that, isn't there? The federal alert that came up when we ran your fingerprints. The Pentagon calling my office directly. Daniels leaned forward. Just who are you, Mr. Harrison? Walter considered the question carefully. Most of his career remained classified, but certain elements had been declassified over time. I served as senior intelligence advisor to 3 presidents' sheriff. I developed counterterrorism protocols still in use today. My security clearance was, and in some ways still is, among the highest in the nation. As Walter spoke, memories of his extraordinary career flashed through his mind. Saigon, 1971. A young technical sergeant. Harrison identifying a pattern in enemy communications that saved an entire battalion from ambush. Berlin, 1983. Master Sergeant Harrison extracting a high-value defector during the height of Cold War tensions. Washington, 1991. Senior Master Sergeant Harrison briefing President Bush on intelligence related to Operation Desert Storm. Baghdad, 2003. Chief Master Sergeant Harrison developing the signal intelligence framework that would later prevent 3 major terrorist attacks on American soil. Through it all, Walter had served with distinction, often as the only black man in rooms where crucial national security decisions were made. He had endured slights, overcome prejudice, and proven his exceptional value to the nation time and again. Yet here he sat, handcuffed in a small-town sheriff's office, arrested for the crime of being black in public. Sheriff Daniels cleared his throat. Mr. Harrison, given the circumstances, I'm prepared to release you immediately with all charges dropped. We can consider this matter closed and avoid any further complications. Walter fixed the sheriff with a steady gaze. I'm afraid it's far too late for that, Sheriff. The proper procedures must be followed now. My rights were violated and Officer Mitchell should be held accountable through official channels. Daniel's face reddened. Mr. Harrison, I'm trying to resolve this situation amicably. There's no need to escalate matters further. Escalation began the moment Officer Mitchell approached me without cause, Sheriff. What you're experiencing now is simply consequence. The door burst open, and Officer Mitchell stormed in his face, contorted with anger. This is bull, Sheriff. You're going to throw away my career over this guy. He gestured dismissively at Walter. He was acting suspicious, and I did my job. Daniel stood quickly. Mitchell, you're suspended. You have no business being in here. Mitchell ignored him, focusing his rage on Walter. You think you're special because you were in the military. I've arrested veterans before. You people always think you deserve special treatment. Sheriff Daniels moved around the desk. Mitchell, that's enough. Get out of my office now." "You people," Walter repeated quietly, his dignity in stark contrast to Mitchell's unraveling composure. "I've served this country for 35 years, protected its secrets, advised its leaders, and developed systems that have saved countless American lives. And still to you, I'm just you people." Mitchell's face twisted with undisguised racism. "You think your fancy military career matters. You don't belong in this town. People like you are ruining places like Pinewood, coming in and acting like Officer Mitchell." Brenner's voice cut through the tirade as he appeared in the doorway. "That's enough." All eyes turned to Brenner, who stood straight-backed for perhaps the first time in his career. "Sheriff, I need to officially report that Officer Mitchell has previously planted evidence on suspects specifically targeting black residents. I've witnessed it multiple times and failed to report it. I'm prepared to provide full details for the record." Mitchell lunged toward Brenner. "You backstabbing little—" Sheriff Daniels and another deputy quickly restrained Mitchell, who continued shouting obscenities as they dragged him from the office. In the sudden quiet that followed, Walter looked at Brenner. "It takes courage to stand up for what's right, Officer Brenner. Late is better than never." Brenner met Walter's eyes briefly before looking away, shame evident in his expression. "I should have said something long ago, sir." The wail of approaching sirens filled the air, joining the now constant sound of helicopter rotors overhead. Sheriff Daniels returned, his face grave. "Mr. Harrison, it appears the FBI has arrived in force. Director Morris herself is leading the operation." Walter nodded unsurprised. "Elaine always was thorough." You know the FBI director personally?" Daniels asked, his voice faint. Before Walter could respond, the building seemed to shudder as the front doors burst open. Raised voices echoed down the hallway. Federal authorities identifying themselves and taking control of the station. Sheriff Daniels sank back into his chair, the full weight of the situation finally settling on his shoulders. "This department is finished, isn't it?" Walter regarded him thoughtfully. "That depends on what you do next, Sheriff. Corruption festers in silence and darkness. Perhaps this is an opportunity to bring things into the light." Comment number 1. If you believe one person standing up for justice can create meaningful change in a broken system. Have you ever witnessed someone finding the courage to speak truth to power like Officer Brenner finally did? Hit the like button if you believe accountability is essential in our justice system, and subscribe to see how this confrontation reaches its dramatic conclusion. The FBI has arrived, but will justice truly be served? What will happen when Walter Harrison finally comes face to face with FBI Director Morris? And what does their shared history mean for the future of Pinewood? The double doors of the Pinewood Sheriff's Station crashed open with military precision as FBI agents in tactical gear poured into the building. They moved with practiced efficiency, securing exits and establishing a perimeter within seconds. Behind them strode FBI Director Elaine Morris, her tailored suit and commanding presence immediately drawing all eyes in the room. She was flanked by 2 senior Justice Department officials and followed by a team of agents carrying electronic equipment and document cases. "This is a federal intervention," she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. "By order of the Attorney General of the United States, this department is temporarily under FBI authority, pending investigation." She scanned the room until her eyes locked on Sheriff Daniels' office. Without hesitation, she crossed the room, agents parting before her. When she entered the office and saw Walter Harrison sitting handcuffed, her professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Remove those immediately," she ordered a nearby agent who quickly unlocked the handcuffs. Walter rubbed his wrists, nodding his thanks. "Hello, Elaine. It's been a while." Director Morris's expression softened momentarily. "Chief, you look well despite the circumstances." Sheriff Daniels stared between them in bewilderment. "You two know each other." Morris turned her attention to Daniels, her expression hardening again. Sheriff John Daniels, I'm FBI Director Elaine Morris. And yes, Chief Master Sergeant Harrison and I have known each other for 22 years. She placed a folder on his desk. This is a federal order authorizing the FBI to assume temporary control of this department for investigation of civil rights violations. I suggest you cooperate fully. As the sheriff reviewed the documents with shaking hands, Walter and Director Morris exchanged a look filled with shared history. 22 years earlier, Morris had been a promising young FBI agent assigned to a joint task force with military intelligence. Walter, then a senior master sergeant, had been put in charge of the operation, targeting a terrorist cell planning attacks on American embassies in Eastern Europe. The mission had gone sideways when Morris's cover was compromised. It was Walter who identified the leak, extracted Morris from an impossible situation, and then, most crucially, shielded her from the political fallout that followed. When senior officials sought a scapegoat, Walter stood firm, putting his own distinguished career at risk to protect the young agent he recognized as exceptional. That intervention had allowed Morris to rise through the ranks, unimpeded, eventually reaching the Bureau's highest position. "Medical team?" Morris called, gesturing to Walter's wrists, which showed bruising from the tight handcuffs. As paramedics entered to examine him, Morris turned back to Sheriff Daniels. "I want all records related to Officer Dane Mitchell's arrests for the past 3 years. All body camera footage, all complaint forms, all internal reviews. My team will require full access to your systems and facilities." Daniels nodded numbly. "Of course, Director. We'll cooperate fully." Agents were already setting up equipment accessing the station's computer systems and securing evidence. Outside, more FBI vehicles arrived, along with news vans and a growing crowd of townspeople. Walter's son, James, pushed through the front doors. His suit rumpled from the hasty drive from Atlanta. When he saw his father being treated by paramedics, he rushed forward. "Dad, are you okay?" Walter embraced his son. "I'm fine, James. Just some sore wrists." He nodded toward Director Morris. "You remember Elaine?" James's eyes widened in recognition. "Director Morris, it's been years." Morris shook his hand. "Your father is being treated with the respect he deserves now, Mr. Harrison. I promise you the situation will be thoroughly investigated." While Walter spoke with his son and received medical attention, Morris coordinated the federal response. Teams of agents spread throughout the station, securing records and interviewing personnel. Officer Mitchell was taken into federal custody, still shouting protests as he was led to an FBI vehicle. Officer Brenner sat in a conference room, giving a detailed statement about Mitchell's history of misconduct and his own failure to report it. In the sheriff's office, Morris confronted Daniels directly. "Your department has a documented pattern of racial discrimination that you've systematically ignored. Officers under your command have violated the civil rights of citizens you swore to protect." Daniels slumped in his chair. "Director, I never authorized any of this." "Your authorization wasn't necessary. Your willful blindness was sufficient." Morris leaned forward. "Sheriff, this isn't just about what happened today. This is about a culture of discrimination that has been allowed to flourish under your leadership." As the federal investigation unfolded inside the scene outside the station grew more charged. Reverend Johnson led community members in prayer while activists chanted for justice. Local media interviewed witnesses from the pharmacy parking lot, their cell phone videos of Walter's arrest now playing on news stations across the state. Walter's military colleagues began arriving, having heard about the incident through their networks. Retired Colonel Marcus Williams, Walter's former commanding officer, pushed through the crowd, his military bearing unmistakable despite civilian clothes. When he entered the station and saw Walter, he saluted sharply before embracing his old friend. "These small-town cops had no idea who they were messing with, did they, Chief?" Walter shook his head. "It shouldn't matter who I am, Marcus. No citizen should be treated this way. As evening approached, Director Morris called a brief press conference outside the station. Walter stood beside her, his dignified presence a stark contrast to the chaos of the day. The FBI has launched a formal civil rights investigation into the Pinewood Sheriff's Department, Morris announced to the assembled reporters and citizens. What happened today to Chief Master Sergeant Walter Harrison is unacceptable in America. No one, regardless of their service record or position, should face discrimination based on the color of their skin. But it is especially egregious when it happens to someone who has given 35 years of distinguished service to this nation. She turned to Walter. "Would you like to say a few words, Chief?" Walter stepped forward, his military bearing evident despite the ordeal. "Today I experienced what too many Black Americans experience every day. The difference is that I have connections that brought immediate consequences. Most victims of racial profiling don't have an FBI director who comes to their aid. They suffer in silence, their dignity stripped, their rights violated." He looked out at the gathered crowd. "If there is any good to come from today's events, let it be that Pinewood confronts the reality of racial bias in its institutions. Let it be that one more community begins the hard work of ensuring equal justice for all its citizens." As Walter finished speaking, the crowd erupted in applause. Behind him, Director Morris watched with pride, remembering the young intelligence officer who had taught her that integrity wasn't just about following rules, but about standing firmly for what was right, regardless of personal cost. Inside the station, the investigation continued through the night. Evidence mounted of systematic discrimination under Sheriff Daniels' leadership. Officer Brenner's testimony revealed dozens of instances of misconduct by Mitchell and others. And in Washington, the Attorney General personally briefed the President on the situation involving one of the nation's most valuable intelligence veterans. 6 weeks after what Pinewood residents now simply called the incident, the consequences continued to ripple through the small Georgia town. The Department of Justice had completed the initial phase of its civil rights investigation, resulting in formal charges against Officer Dane Mitchell for multiple civil rights violations. The investigation had uncovered a pattern of discriminatory policing that extended beyond Mitchell to several other officers and department policies. Sheriff John Daniels had been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation, his once secure position now in jeopardy, as evidence mounted of his willful ignorance of discrimination within his department. The Pinewood Town Council chambers were packed for the emergency session called to address the crisis. Walter Harrison sat in the front row, composed and attentive, as Mayor Eleanor Simmons outlined the steps being taken to reform the Sheriff's Department. "We have entered into a consent decree with the Department of Justice," the mayor announced, her voice solemn. "This agreement will require comprehensive reforms in our law enforcement practices, including new training protocols, community oversight, and transparent complaint procedures." The audience murmured as the mayor continued. "Additionally, Officer Kyle Brenner has resigned from the department and has agreed to testify in the federal case against Officer Mitchell. He has also accepted a position with the newly formed Community Oversight Board." Walter glanced across the room to where Brenner sat, looking both nervous and relieved. Their eyes met briefly, and Walter gave a small nod of acknowledgement. The young man had made the difficult choice to break the blue wall of silence, and while it came too late to prevent Walter's humiliation, it might help prevent future injustices. Outside the town hall, Pinewood remained divided over the federal intervention. Some residents, particularly in the white community, resented the scrutiny and defended the sheriff's department. Signs reading, "Support our local police," and "Federal overreach" appeared in some yards. But in the Black community, and among many younger residents, the investigation was seen as long overdue. Walter had become a reluctant symbol for both sides, either a respected veteran, wronged by overzealous federal authorities, or a catalyst for necessary change. In the weeks following his arrest, Walter had received numerous calls and visits from former military colleagues. His small home on Maple Street had hosted generals, intelligence officials, and even a former Secretary of Defense, all coming to express their outrage at his treatment and offer support. Walter appreciated their concern, but remained focused on the larger issues at stake. He had established the Pinewood Community Justice Foundation, using his connections and newfound public platform to address systemic inequalities in law enforcement. Working with his son, James Walter, developed programs to provide legal assistance to victims of discrimination and to create dialogue between law enforcement and minority communities. On a warm Saturday morning, Walter stood before a gathered crowd at Pinewood Community Park, officially launching the Foundation's first initiative, a scholarship program for minority students pursuing careers in law enforcement or criminal justice. Change comes not just from identifying what's wrong, Walter told the assembled residents, but from actively building what's right. We need more diverse voices in our justice system, voices that understand the communities they serve. Among those attending was Officer Brenner, now working with the Oversight Board while pursuing a degree in social work. His testimony against former colleagues had made him an outcast among many officers, but had earned him respect from community leaders committed to reform. Meanwhile, in a federal detention center awaiting trial, Dane Mitchell seethed with resentment. His initial bravado had crumbled as the evidence against him mounted. Body camera footage, witness statements, and Brenner's testimony had revealed a consistent pattern of targeting black residents. Mitchell's lawyer had suggested a plea deal, but Mitchell refused, still unable to recognize the gravity of his actions or the harm he had caused. The national media had seized on the story, painting Pinewood as a microcosm of America's ongoing struggle with racial justice. Walter had given several carefully considered interviews, always steering the conversation away from his personal ordeal and toward the systemic issues it revealed. His military background and dignified bearing made him a compelling spokesperson, someone whose patriotism could not be questioned even as he called for fundamental reforms. 4 months after the arrest, Walter received a phone call from the White House. The president wanted to meet with him to discuss police reform initiatives at the federal level. As Walter packed for the trip to Washington, he reflected on the strange turn his retirement had taken. He had moved to Pinewood seeking quiet and anonymity after a career spent in the shadows of national security. Now he found himself in the spotlight, using his voice for those who often went unheard. The day before his White House meeting, Walter visited FBI headquarters at Director Morris's invitation. They sat in her office reminiscing about their shared past and discussing the changes unfolding in Pinewood. "You've turned a personal injustice into a movement for change, Chief," Morris said, genuine admiration in her voice. "That doesn't surprise me. You always saw the bigger picture." Walter smiled slightly. "I had good mentors who taught me that responsibility doesn't end with identifying problems. It requires building solutions." He paused, looking out her window at the Washington skyline. "You know, throughout my career, I faced discrimination even while holding the highest clearances and briefing presidents. The uniform and rank provided some protection, but never immunity. What happened in Pinewood was just a more blatant version of what many of us experience throughout our lives." Morris nodded soberly. "The Bureau still has work to do on that front as well. Your case has prompted some overdue conversations here too." Back in Pinewood, the community continued its difficult journey toward healing and reform. The consent decree had forced uncomfortable conversations about race and policing. Some officers resigned rather than adapt to the new requirements. Others embraced the changes, recognizing the opportunity to better serve their entire community. Walter's Foundation had become a bridge between divided factions, providing a neutral space for dialogue and reconciliation. 6 months to the day after Walter's arrest, the Justice Department announced formal indictments against Mitchell and 2 other former Pinewood officers. Sheriff Daniels avoided criminal charges but was forced to resign. The announcement made national news with legal experts citing the case as an example of the Justice Department's renewed commitment to civil rights enforcement. That evening, Walter sat on his porch watching the sunset over Pinewood. His phone rang continuously, with calls from reporters seeking comment, but he let them go to voicemail. This moment of reflection was for himself alone. The injustice he had suffered had opened wounds both personal and communal. But in that pain, there was also possibility. The possibility of healing that went beyond surface remedies to address deeper inequities. Walter thought of all the black men and women who had faced similar discrimination without the benefit of his connections and public platform. Their stories often went untold, their suffering unaddressed. In using his voice for them, he had found new purpose in his retirement years. As darkness fell over the town, Walter Harrison made a silent promise to continue the work for as long as necessary. The path to justice was long, but after 35 years of serving his country from the shadows, he was prepared to walk this new path in the light. 1 year to the day after Walter Harrison's wrongful arrest, Pinewood had transformed in ways few could have imagined. The small Georgia town had become an unlikely model for police reform, with law enforcement agencies from across the South sending representatives to study the changes implemented under the Justice Department consent decree. On this anniversary, Walter stood at a podium in the newly dedicated Community Justice Center, addressing a diverse gathering of residents, officials, and media. At 74, he remained an imposing figure, his military bearing undiminished by age or the events of the past year. A year ago today, I was handcuffed and humiliated for the crime of existing while black in America. Walter began, his deep voice carrying through the packed auditorium. Today we gather not to dwell on that injustice, but to celebrate the progress that has risen from it. He gestured to the modern facility around them, built with federal grants and donations from across the country. This center represents our community's commitment to equal justice, to transparent policing, and to healing the divisions that have kept us from truly seeing one another. The audience included Pinewood's new sheriff, Maria Vasquez, the first woman and first Hispanic person to hold the position. Beside her sat Kyle Brenner, now director of the Community Oversight Board and completing his master's degree in criminal justice reform. Even some of Walter's former military colleagues had traveled to Pinewood for the occasion, including 3 generals and FBI Director Elaine Morris, who had become a regular visitor to the town. The journey to this moment had not been easy. The federal trial of former officer Dane Mitchell had divided Pinewood with painful testimony revealing the extent of discriminatory policing that had flourished under the previous administration. Mitchell had eventually been convicted on multiple civil rights violations and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. His supporters still maintained he had been scapegoated, but their voices had diminished as the evidence of his misconduct became impossible to ignore. The reform process had forced Pinewood to confront uncomfortable truths about its history and institutions. Town hall meetings had often grown heated, with some residents resisting changes they saw as federal overreach. Walter had stood firm through these conflicts, always redirecting the conversation from personal grievances to systemic solutions. His Pinewood Community Justice Foundation had expanded beyond its initial goals, now offering programs in conflict resolution, legal aid, and community policing. Most significantly, it had established a citizen review board with actual oversight authority, ensuring that complaints against officers would never again be summarily dismissed. As Walter continued his address, he acknowledged the complexity of the journey. Reform is never simple or painless. It requires us to examine assumptions we've held for generations. It demands that we listen to voices we have previously silenced. And it asks us to imagine a justice system that truly serves all citizens equally. He paused, looking out at the audience. But the rewards of this difficult work are evident today in a Pinewood that is more united, more just, and more committed to the true meaning of community than at any time in our history. After the ceremony, Walter met privately with several families whose cases of police misconduct had previously been ignored. With the help of Walter's foundation and his son James's legal expertise, these cases had been reopened, resulting in cleared records, compensation, and formal apologies from the department. One elderly woman clasped Walter's hands in hers. "Before you came to Pinewood, nobody listened to us," she said, tears in her eyes. "Now they can't ignore us anymore." That evening, Walter hosted a small gathering at his home for those who had been instrumental in the reform process. Director Morris raised a toast to her former mentor. "To Walter Harrison, who turned personal injustice into community transformation." Walter smiled, but shook his head slightly. "The transformation came from many hands working together. I was just the catalyst." Morris raised an eyebrow. "A catalyst that happened to have the ear of 3 former presidents and half the Pentagon." The group laughed, but Walter remained thoughtful. His military career had taught him that true leadership wasn't about personal recognition, but about creating conditions where others could succeed. He had applied that same principle to Pinewood's reform movement, using his connections and platform to amplify local voices rather than replace them. The next morning, Walter drove to the Pinewood Cemetery to visit Grace's grave as he did every week. He sat beside the headstone telling her about the ceremony and the progress the town had made. "You would have been proud, Grace," he said softly. "Not of the recognition, but of the change. That's what always mattered to you." On his drive back home, Walter passed Thompson's Pharmacy, the site of his arrest a year earlier. The business had new ownership now. The previous pharmacist had sold the store after it was revealed that he had been the one to call the police that day, falsely reporting suspicious behavior. Walter continued through town, noting the changes both visible and invisible. The sheriff's department vehicles now carried body cameras and displayed the department's new motto, "To protect, serve, and respect." Community policing officers walked beats in all neighborhoods, not just the wealthy ones. Training on implicit bias and de-escalation was now mandatory and ongoing. Most importantly, a sense of cautious trust was beginning to replace the fear that had characterized relations between law enforcement and Pinewood's Black community for generations. As Walter pulled into his driveway, he noticed a delivery man approaching with a package. The young man, who was Black, moved with the wary body language Walter recognized all too well, the careful movements of someone who had learned to navigate a world where their presence alone could be perceived as threatening. Walter greeted him warmly, accepting the package and engaging him in brief conversation. The young man mentioned he was new to Pinewood, having moved from Atlanta for the lower cost of living. "How do you find it here?" Walter asked. The delivery man shrugged. "Better than I expected. Police actually smiled and waved at me yesterday instead of following me around. That's new." Walter nodded, understanding the significance of this small interaction. Things are changing. Slowly, but they're changing. After the delivery man left, Walter sat on his porch opening the package to find a bound copy of the Justice Department's final report on Pinewood's reforms. The cover letter, signed by the Attorney General himself, cited the town as an emerging national model for community-centered police reform. Walter leafed through the document, noting both the progress acknowledged and the work still to be done. His phone rang, his son James calling from Atlanta. "Dad, have you seen the news? The president is citing Pinewood in his speech on police reform today. They're using the Oversight Board as a model for the national legislation." Walter smiled. "That's good news. The more departments adopt these changes, the fewer Walter Harrisons will end up in handcuffs for living their lives." "You could have just retired quietly, you know," James said, a note of pride in his voice. "Played golf, written your memoirs." Walter chuckled. "You know I never liked golf. And as for memoirs, I think I'm still writing that story. As the sun set over Pinewood, Walter Harrison reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. His 35 years of military service had prepared him to face crises with calm determination. His experiences with discrimination throughout his life had taught him resilience. And now, in what should have been his quiet retirement years, he had found a new mission just as important as any he'd undertaken for his country. The wrongful arrest that had humiliated him had ultimately empowered an entire community to demand change. The system that had failed him was being rebuilt imperfectly but genuinely into something more just. And Walter Harrison, who had spent his career in the shadows protecting American ideals, was now helping to fulfill those ideals in the clear light of day. What do you think about Walter's approach to turning injustice into positive change? Would you have had his patience and dignity in the face of discrimination? Comment below with your thoughts. If Walter's story of resilience and transformation inspired you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of justice and change. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Walter Harrison's extraordinary story. And remember, true justice requires not just good laws, but good people willing to uphold them. Walter Harrison's story teaches us that dignity and integrity can triumph even in the face of injustice. His calm, commanding presence, cultivated through decades of military service, proved more powerful than the prejudice he encountered. The incident demonstrates how racial discrimination persists in America, regardless of one's achievements or service to country. Yet it also shows that systemic change is possible when brave individuals stand up for what's right. Officer Brenner's evolution reminds us that silence enables injustice while speaking truth to power, though difficult creates possibility for redemption and reform. The community's transformation illustrates that confronting uncomfortable truths about racism can lead to healing and progress. Perhaps most importantly, Walter's response to injustice offers a blueprint for effective advocacy, using personal pain as motivation for systemic change, building bridges across divided communities, and creating institutions that outlast individual efforts. His story shows that true justice requires not just accountability for wrongdoing, but the creation of new systems that prevent future harm. What would you do if faced with discrimination? Would you have Walter's courage to transform personal injustice into community change? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story of dignity prevailing against racism moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of justice and resilience. Share with someone who needs inspiration to stand against discrimination. Thank you for witnessing Walter's journey. Remember that every community has the potential for transformation when good people refuse to accept injustice.